Hello and welcome to our virtual craft time. I'm Sarah, the museum educator at the IU Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. Today we'll be focusing on a technique known as resist. Sometimes that word is used when you're fighting against something, but in this case we're talking about an art technique that is used in dyeing things like Easter eggs, clothing, blankets, and more. You might be familiar with things decorated using a resist, even if you didn't know that's what it was called. Tie-dye is a common form of resist. A resist is something that can be used on many different types of materials and in many different art forms. It allows you to create a color or a pattern on one part of something while protecting another and leaving it its original color. To apply a resist, you decide where you don't want color, and you cover it with something that will repel the ink or the paint or the dye. We're going to try our hand at a very basic resist technique today, and then we'll look at some of the artifacts in the IUMAA collection that were decorated with resists. We're going to try this 2 different ways today so that we can see it in 2 different ways and that will help us understand it better. Today you'll need 2 or 3 pieces of paper. You'll also need some markers, some tape, and some crayons. If you happen to have some oil pastels at home, you can use those too. The first thing we want to do is to make sure that we're working on a surface that we can clean easily. We don't want to get in trouble with our grown-ups. And for this first technique, we're going to use the paper and the tape. You can do this on construction paper, but it will be easier if you just use plain old paper that you would put in a printer or a photocopier or even just a page from your notebook. If you happen to have a sketchbook like the one I'm using, that one will work too. So to start with, figure out a design. I'm going to keep things pretty basic today and just do a geometric pattern. I've already put down some pieces of tape, but I'm going to put down a few more pieces to help complete my design. We're not going to do anything too fancy here. And you can use painter's tape or masking tape. Don't rub it down too hard because we don't want to make it so we can't get it off. So the next thing we're going to do after we have our design is apply some color. And I think I'm in the mood to use crayons for this part. So I'm going to take a purple crayon and do some coloring here. And you can go over the tape. That is no problem at all. I think I want some red on this part. And then I could keep going and cover the whole page, but I don't want to take up too much of your time, and I do want you to see what happens when we take off the tape. So you find the edge of your tape and start to peel it off, and you'll see that where we had the tape, we have these nice firm lines that didn't get colored at all. Oops, I took off some of my paper with that one too. So if you have painter's tape, that's probably what I would use, but I didn't have any painter's tape today. So just use what you've got at home. So I've got one that I did earlier that you can see. I did with markers. And here I had some marker on my fingers that got on the tape, that got on the paper. So do just be aware of where you're getting color and where it will wind up. So that's one way of doing a resist. Another way to do it involves drawing with crayons and then coloring over it with markers, or if you prefer, you could also use watercolor paints. So the first step is to draw your designs. It can be really hard to draw white designs on white paper. I'll show you what I mean. I'm just going to do some spirals here. I can't see what I've done. at all. And that can be a little bit frustrating, especially if you're going for something particular. So you could use a silver or a light yellow crayon so that you can see your design a little bit better. This will show up a little bit more in the final product, but that's okay. You'll still get the idea of what we're doing here. So after you've drawn your design, you can take a nice dark color marker and start coloring over it. And you may have done this if you've dyed Easter eggs before. If you've ever drawn on the Easter eggs with the clear or white crayon before you've dunked them into the cup of dye, then you've done something very similar to this. So you can see it's pretty faint here. But the crayon is a form of wax that repels the ink that is in the marker. And all over the world, people use this type of technique to decorate clothing, pieces of fabric, pieces of pottery, all sorts of different things. So this is a simple version that you can do at home. And I brought some photographs today so that you could see some of the wonderful designs from around the world that appear on our artifacts that we have at the museum. So the first thing that I'm going to show you is from West Africa. This is a type of fabric that is decorated. It's from Nigeria. And the group of people that make these wonderful things called adire or ajire cloth are the Yoruba people. And they are predominantly found in the southwestern part of Nigeria, although you find Yoruba people all over the world today. Traditionally, these fabrics are done with a resist, and the resist is actually done using something you can eat. It's done using a special kind of starchy vegetable known as cassava or manioc, and it's turned into a paste, and you draw with the paste, and then you dye the fabric. When you see beautiful blue fabrics from West Africa, very often they're done with a special kind of plant called indigo, although you can also just buy blue dyes in the store. I brought another type of adire cloth in the next photo, and you can see the first one was done with kind of geometric patterns, whereas this one's done with more of a scene. So you might see some animals there, there's definitely some birds and some people, and lots of other interesting design motifs there. So the next piece of fabric that I brought is decorated using a technique that's a special kind of resist technique, and it's called batik. Batik is a form of resist where you use a special tool and you fill it with hot wax and you draw in very thin lines with that hot wax. And to get the multiple colors that you see in this particular fabric, you would draw different layers and use different colors of dye to get the different layers and different colors that you see. We see a couple of different pieces of batik that I brought today. So I brought another one here that is these fantastic birds. And I think I brought a close-up photograph too, so you could see the fine little details that are done on this bird. Can you imagine drawing all of this with wax? I think that would be really interesting and really challenging. I brought another one so that you didn't think it was all just animals or abstract designs. In this one, you can see characters that are very similar to those that you would find in a puppet show in Indonesia. And many of these puppets and stylized figures are things that you could find out more about on the internet. I don't want you to think that all resist dyed fabrics come from West Africa or Indonesia. So I brought some from other parts of the world too. This next one that we're going to look at is from China, and it was also dyed with indigo. And a lot of this would also have been done using a wax resist. But there are other really interesting ways of doing resists. And in the next image that I brought, we see a close-up of that Chinese textile. And here we can see a really interesting pattern. And this one is done with another kind of food. In this case, chickpeas or garbanzo beans were tied up in little bundles all over the fabric. And then when it's dyed, those little bundles are a different color from the rest of the fabric because those chickpeas that are tied into little pouches act as a resist. This final one is probably the most complicated piece of resist that I brought with me today. And it's a very special technique called ikat. And this particular example is from a country in Central Asia called Uzbekistan. And to do this form of resist, you have to start at the very beginning before you even make your fabric. You actually dye the different pieces of thread that make up fabrics in different ways to create these sorts of patterns. So now that you've seen just a few things that can be created using resist dyes, I hope you'll feel inspired and go out and try making your own. Thank you so much for joining us today. I look forward to seeing you again for another virtual craft day.